As April 1945 came around in Berlin, the city which became the last bastion of the Nazi Party would be battered by Soviet artillery. The Battle of Berlin would become the final battle of the Second World War in Europe, and there would be ruthless fighting in the streets. But on the 20th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler had been for months holed up inside his underground complex, the Fuhrerbunker, made his final trip to the surface. He did this on his 56th birthday, and he went into the ruined garden of the Reich Chancellery, and the final footage of Hitler would be captured as he was seen giving out iron crosses to a number of boy soldiers belonging to the Hitler Youth. These children were tasked with laying their lives down to defend Berlin, but that afternoon Berlin was hit by Soviet artillery for the first time. Over the next few days, things would get fraught inside of Hitler's bunker. Within 10 days he would be dead. But there was one forgotten member of the Fuhrerbunker who also met a rather brutal demise inside of the German capital, and this was the man that actually married Adolf Hitler to his long-term girlfriend, Eva Braun. Walter Wagner is often forgotten, but his involvement in the most depressing marriage in history, one of the most short-lived, would be pivotal. Join us today as we look at the brutal death of the man that married Hitler, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Walter Wagner was born on the 25th of June 1907, and little is known about his early life, but he would become a lawyer, and he then joined the Nazi Party on the 1st of July 1931. He was considered a rather early member, and throughout the Third Reich he would use his legal standing to become a rather senior figure in local government. In 1938 he was made the acting head of the Central Legal Department in the Berlin Gau, or region. He would be confirmed in this role 6 years later by Joseph Goebbels, who was the Gauleiter of Berlin. But Wagner would serve as a lawyer to high-ranking Nazis, and he would specifically help Goebbels in the Berlin region with resettling residents of the capital in different regions of Poland, which had been captured by the German army following the 1939 invasion. These people, or ethnic Germans as they were known, would be placed in the area to live as part of Hitler's empire. This work would also involve stealing property from those in the region, for example Jews, and Wagner would become a well-known administrator in his work for this. He continued to work inside of Berlin and also in Poland, and he would then be based in 1943 in Posen. Here he met his future wife, a Nazi social worker, who was involved in the resettlement scheme, but he also met the notorious Arthur Greiser, the local governor in the area. Wagner and Cordelia Kröpels got married on the 10th of March 1944, and they then returned to Berlin and lived there until October 1944. His wife became pregnant and she would leave Berlin to live with her mother, but in the same month Wagner became a member of the Volkssturm, or the Home Guard, those ordinary civilians who would act in the dying days of the Second World War as the last bastion of defending Berlin and other German cities. Wagner was seen as a faithful member of the Nazi Party and a skilled lawyer who worked with Goebbels, but he then, as mentioned, was called up for military service. But he would probably have never expected what his role in the final days of the Second World War would have been. He would live inside of his apartment with his sister, however then the call came for Wagner to be taken to the Fuhrerbunker, and specifically, Adolf Hitler had called for him. It's likely Joseph Goebbels, who was also in the bunker with his family, had recommended Wagner to Hitler to do a task which would usually be a happy moment. At this time in the Second World War, Berlin's communication had been cut off from the rest of Germany, and secure radio contact with defending units had been lost, and the command staff inside the Fuhrerbunker had to depend on telephone wires to pass information. Hitler had in the days before flew into a furious rage as he found out that Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, would have tried to surrender with the Western Allies, and Himmler claimed he had permission and authority to do this, whilst Hitler was incapacitated in the bunker. Hitler was furious and he went into a huge rage and ordered Himmler's arrest, and he even had Hermann Fegelein, the husband of Eva Braun's sister, and Himmler's SS representative, inside the bunker, shot dead for desertion. Around this time, the Soviet Red Army were getting very close to the bunker. They had pushed forward towards Potsdamer Platz, around 1 kilometre away from the bunker. They were getting ready to storm the Reich Chancellery. But Hitler would then give out instructions that he intended to marry Eva Braun, his long-standing and loyal girlfriend, inside of the Fuhrerbunker. This was a strange decision, as his Reich and life was crumbling around him, and he wanted to do this in a sense to reward Eva. But because of this, Hitler would need a notary or a lawyer to facilitate the marriage, and this is why Walter Wagner was summoned. Goebbels had been told to find a registrar to do this, and he had, on the 28th of April 1945, ordered an SS unit to find Wagner and to bring him to the bunker. Goebbels knew that Wagner held the qualifications for this job, and the Waffen-SS unit arrived in an armoured personnel carrier to Wagner's house. However, they discovered he was not home, and he was actually in the area of Friedrichstrasse, fighting against the Soviets as part of the Volkssturm. The Waffen-SS detachment managed to locate him, and he was then taken to the Fuhrerbunker, but when arriving there, Wagner realised the correct paperwork to conduct a marriage ceremony was not there, and because of this he had to be taken to Pankow, where he found the right documents. He was then taken back to the Fuhrerbunker, all whilst under heavy fire. It was said that Wagner was just an ordinary man, who had never met the Führer before, and who was only known to Goebbels. He must have been terribly shocked to have been driven away in an armoured car, and then taken down into the bunker. Around midnight on the 29th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler married Eva Braun inside of the Führerbunker. The ceremony took place inside of the map room within the bunker complex, and acting as witnesses were Goebbels and Martin Bormann. Wagner would conduct the ceremony and direct the nuptials, and with this he is remembered in history as the man who married Adolf Hitler. It was a very private wedding, and what is shocking is that this was an ordinary man marrying the former all-powerful dictator of Nazi Germany, whilst his empire was literally crumbling around him. It's likely that every few minutes Soviet shells could be heard above them whilst the wedding took place, but following the end of the wedding, Wagner would immediately leave the bunker after his work was done, and he rejoined his unit to fight the Soviets. He was not present at the wedding breakfast Hitler would host to celebrate the marriage, and Hitler would following this then dictate his last will and testament, as he had made his mind up as to which way he would go. Some sources claim that straight after the wedding he made his will, but the couple would be married for around 40 hours before they would both take their lives inside of Hitler's study. But Hitler and Eva Braun would last longer than Walter Wagner did. After reuniting back with his group, Wagner's unit of the Volkssturm were placed in charge of defending Potsdamer Platz. At this point in the battle, the fighting was desperate and the Volkssturm were not very well trained. They would try to repel the might of the Red Army as much as they could, but they would buy Hitler a number of hours to prolong his life. Around him, Wagner's friends and commanders were falling, as Soviet tank fire focused on them, and Wagner would, following the death of his commander, assume command of the company of fighters. He continued to direct his men to fight around the Anhalter-Bahnhof area, and during this he would be shot. The fighting was incredibly ferocious, but as he tried to fight on with whatever weapons he had, Wagner would be killed. A Soviet soldier would fire a fatal bullet towards him, and with this he was hit in the head and was instantly killed. This was less than 24 hours after he had married Hitler to Eva Braun, and his body and remains were never actually found. His widow would later have a few issues remarrying because of the fact his remains were never located, and there was in the 1960s some rumours that Wagner was in fact still alive and was actually living in Frankfurt. However, Walter Wagner would be the man who married Adolf Hitler, and he was taken from his role in defending Berlin to marry the dictator and the man he was fighting for. Walter Wagner's wife would also later be interrogated by the British to find out his location and whether she had heard from him, as they wanted to know more about the final hours of Hitler's life. But what is shocking is that he was someone who was just a lawyer, whose days of being involved in the legal system were very much over, and he was recommended by Goebbels to be the man who married Hitler. When the Waffen-SS detachment and unit arrived and were looking for him, Wagner must have been taken back and shocked, but within 24 hours of marrying the Nazi dictator, he would be like many of the Volkssturm members, laying dead inside of the city he was meant to be defending as the Soviet Red Army were pushing on. But Walter Wagner is remembered in history as the man who married Adolf Hitler. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.